We welcome back everyone that's been following our study on the book of James. Today is we'll get in. We're going to try to finish up this little section that we're on here in chapter 5 because we are going to be praying in the month today. So since it's the first Wednesday of the month. So we last time or Sunday we started chapter 5. Verse 1 says, "Go to now, ye rich men, weep and howl for your miseries that shall come upon you." Verse 2, "Your riches are corrupted, and your garments are moth-eaten." 3, "Your gold and silver is cankered, and the rust of them shall be a witness against you, and shall eat your flesh as it were fire. Ye have heaped treasure together for the last days." Verse number 4 says, "Behold, the hire of the laborers who have reaped down your fields, which is of you kept back by fraud, crieth, and the cries of them which have reaped are entered into the ears of the Lord of Sabaoth." So we get this, we find James is telling them about the cries of the workers. Basically what we're getting here is, if we could put this into today's terminology, basically, we would find that what we would have, this would be like if the laborers, they were sitting there and according to their contract, and then they weren't getting paid what they were supposed to be getting paid. Well, here in James's day, we find that the unpaid wages of the laborers cries out against the rich. They kept back or would not pay their wages. You know, Jeremiah warned about this kind of behavior. You know, we find that here in James's day. Now, this has been brought to his attention, and he's still talking to the brethren. So we don't really know whether these things are happening in and through the brethren or outside of the church, and he is just warning the brethren, or whether they are the brethren that are doing these things. I kind of get that all these things he's been witnessing one place somehow or the other, and that's the reason why he's going through these things. And we find, you know, here in Jeremiah chapter 22 and verse 13, it says, "Woe unto him that buildeth his house by unrighteousness, and his chambers by wrong, that useth his neighbor's service without wages, and giveth him not for his work." Leviticus 19 in verse 13 says, "Thou shalt not defraud thy neighbor, neither rob him. The wages of him that is hired shall not abide with thee all night until the morning." So we find that these wages of the workers were to be paid before sunset. Now we find that in the parable, Jesus taught it about the workers in the field. And, you know, he would hire them in that parable. He hired some in the morning, he hired some in the middle of the morning, some in the afternoon. And then at the evening or the end of the day, he went to pay all of them. Well, that's how they were supposed to be doing. That's what James is giving them. These workers were supposed to be paid before the sunset, and many of them lived day by day. They were able to survive by what they got that day. You know, we kind of see that. We see that today in a lot of times along at the trucking terminals, you'll find those that sit outside and they kind of lumpers, they call them, and they're sitting up here and they'll want somebody to hire them, and they'll go with them to help them unload, and then so that they could get paid. So we look at these things, either way it goes, they live day by day by what they make. And evidently we find here that these folks, the ones that own the field that had hired them, were not paying them day by day like they should have been. And Deuteronomy 24 in verses 14 and 15 says, "Thou shalt not oppress an hired servant that is poor and needy, whether he be of thy brethren or of thy strangers that are in the land within thy gates. At his day thou shalt give him his hire. Neither shall the sun go down upon it, for he is poor, and setteth his heart upon it, lest he cry against thee unto the Lord, and it be sin unto thee." Now, in these verses we find that, the common practice was if you hired them to work today, you paid them today. And that's the way it should have been, because many of them, like I said, their heart was set on what they were going to be making. So, and when you don't do that, then, it hurts a lot of people, or hurts those individuals. James warns of illegal wealth that comes from stealing, fraud, and deceptions. God's people are to be faithful in paying their debts. There's always a need for honesty. Honesty is not the best policy, it is the only policy. If a guy you hire a guy to give you an honest day's wages, and at the end of that day you're going to give him that honest day's wage that you agreed upon, then pay him. That's what James is getting at here. You don't sit up here and hire them and get the work out of him and say, I don't have enough money in my pocket, I'll catch you tomorrow. No, that person needs to be paid today. Because most of the time, the person is not going to catch that person tomorrow and pay them. This word crieth that we find up here in verse 4, it means to shriek to God for vengeance. The cries of the wages of the cheated laborers reached the Lord. So what we find here, it's not the people, but we find James is sitting here saying, even the wages that you fail to give will cry out to the Lord for vengeance. And when we look at these things, our vices have voices. Cain found this out when he murdered Abel. We find that Abel's blood cried out to God. In Proverbs 13 and verse 11, it says, "Wealth gotten by vanity shall be diminished, but he that gathereth by labor shall increase." Malachi chapter 3, verse 7 and 10. It says, "Even from the days of your fathers ye are gone away from mine ordinances, and have not kept them. Return unto me, and I will return unto you, saith the Lord of hosts. But ye said, Wherein shall we return? Will a man rob God? Yet ye have robbed me. But ye say, Wherein have we robbed thee? In tithes and offerings. Ye are cursed with a curse, for ye have robbed me, even this whole nation. Bring ye all the tithes into the storehouse, that there may be meat in mine house, and prove me Now herewith saith the Lord of hosts, if I will not open you the windows of heaven and pour you out a blessing, that there shall not be room enough to receive it. You know, we get in here, James is pointing out, for one, that what they were doing by not following through with the agreement that they had with the laborers, for one, was wrong. It's sin. Two, he's saying that even, you know, the laborers might not cry out, but the wages that you still holding in your pocket that you should have given to the laborers, that will cry out unto God. So, you know, either way it goes, you're not going to get by with this stuff. So you need to do the right thing and do as you agreed to. And then in verse 5, we find the very carnality of the rich. It says, ye have lived in pleasure on the earth and been wanting. Ye have nourished your hearts as in a day of slaughter. You know, these folks that James was talking about here, or talking to, rather, were living in luxury and self-indulgence. Their lives were soft and carefree. They nourished or fattened their hearts by indulging in every desire that you could think of. They lived in utter pleasure, giving or fattening their heart. This word pleasure is from the Greek root, and it means to break down. Soft living has a tendency to destroy or break down the character of people. They had been wanting, the verse says, which is a very strong word. It means to live in lewdness and fleshly, sensual living. In the palace of Nero in Rome, not far from the Colosseum, where the Christian martyrs were tortured and killed, there is a dining room. They had something like a well in the middle of it. And Nero and his guests used to eat so much that they could not hold any more. So they would go to this well or this hole in the middle of the room, vomit up their food, and then start pigging out again. You know, you got to make room. Nero was a man, but he lived like a pig. You know, when we look at these things, it's these things of the rich that James is warning. He's giving them. He's telling folks that, you know, man, they've been like this, and they'll continue to be like this. And yet, we got a lot of people just like this today in the world. You know, many people, especially young people, they don't know how to work because they've never been taught or been expected to work. They just think that it's somebody owes them something. Somebody, hey, you give me. Don't let me work for it, but just give it to me. And we find that a lot today. Much of what we have or much of what they have had been handed to them. When young people have nothing to do to occupy their time, they tend to indulge in that which is destructive. They desire to satisfy their curiosity and their desires about a lot of things, drugs, alcohol, sex, all kinds of things. Solomon had everything he wanted, but he spoke of the emptiness and the futility of his self-indulgence. Selfishness leads to self-destruction. Ecclesiastes chapter 2, in verses 4 through 11, it says, I made me great works. I builded me houses. I planted me vineyards. I made me gardens and orchards. And I planted trees in them of all kind of fruit. I made me pools of water to water therewith the wood that bringeth forth trees. I got me servants and maids, and had servants born in my house. Also I had great possessions of great and small cattle above all that were in Jerusalem before me. I gathered me also silver and gold and peculiar treasure of kings and of the provinces. I got me men singers and women singers, and the delights of the sons of men as musical instruments, and that of all sorts. So I was great and increased more than all that were before me in Jerusalem. Also my wisdom remained with me. And whatsoever mine eyes desired, I kept not from them. I withheld not my heart from any joy, for my heart rejoiceth in all my labor. And this was my portion of all my labor. Then I looked on all the works that my hands had wrought, and on the labor that I had labored to do. And behold, all was vanity and vexation of spirit, and there was no profit under the sun. Because there was no legitimate work being done. James is telling them, instead of just laying back on your laurels and being like a little bird in the nest, feed me, feed me, feed me, you need to get out and do what you're supposed to be doing. Get out and go to work. Get out and get a job. Get out and fend for yourself. Then you won't have any time for all this other stuff that's just eating you up. There's nothing wrong in being wealthy or having nice things. The Bible makes it clear. God is the one that blesses us with wealth. Deuteronomy 8:18 it says, But thou shalt remember the Lord thy God, for it is He that giveth thee power to get wealth, and He may establish His covenant, which He sware unto the fathers, as it is this day. Proverbs 10, verse 22, The blessing of the Lord, it maketh rich, and He addeth no sorrow with it. 1 Timothy 6, and verse 17, Charge them that are rich in this world, and that they may be not high-minded, nor trust in uncertain riches, but in the living God, who giveth us richly all things to enjoy. Abraham was a very wealthy man, yet he controlled his wealth. His wealth did not control him. He maintained his faith and his character. On the other hand, we find Lot. Now, Lot was governed by his greed. It ruined him and his family. And it's good to have riches in your hand as long as they do not get into your heart. Psalm 62 and verse 10, Trust not in oppression, and become not vain in robbery. If riches increase, set not your heart upon them. James wants them to realize that when wealth destroys your character, the lives of others, and corrupts your relationship with God, that's when you have a problem. That's what he was trying to tell them here. Your wealth has corrupted you. It's gotten between you and God. Your wealth has become your God. And you, to the point that you don't even want to give it out to the laborers that have harvested and worked in your fields. You're not out there doing it. You hired them, then you need to pay them what you've agreed. Few things test a man's spiritual condition more accurately than how he uses his money. Many waste their lives today in the pursuit of unimportant things. God wants us to use our funds to care for our families, to win the lost, to care for those in need, support the ministry of the church. When we have the wrong priorities with our funds, we tend to nourish our hearts as in a day of slaughter, the verse says. A boy that managed to make pigs follow him faithfully to the slaughterhouse was asked, "How'd you do that?" He said, "It's easy. I just walked before them, and I kept dropping a few beans for them to eat. By feeding them and giving to them what they want, I lead them to the slaughter." This is what Satan does with you and me. He baits us with our lustful desires and then leads us along until we get trapped. You know, there are some things you could take. You could take sheep, for instance. You push cattle to where they want to go. You lead sheep. Because if you don't, with their head down to the ground, they'll eat. As long as they can see green grass right here, they'll continue to eat. And before you know it, you got sheep everywhere. That's the reason why they would all bring them in at nighttime and try to keep them down into a certain place. Verse 6. He talks about the condemnation of the just. Chapter 5, verse 6, "Ye have condemned and killed the just, and he doth not resist you." You know, money can distort the reasoning of a person. It can make people think good of that which is bad, bad of that which is good. James says, "You have condemned and killed the just, even though they don't resist you." The wealthy were condemning, they were passing judgment or sentence upon the righteous. That's what he's getting at here. You know, the righteous is trying to do the right things. God is the priority here. The rich were coming into this and they were saying, no. My wealth is the priority here. And they were condemning the righteous, even to the point of, you know, they were suing and they were doing all kinds of things, trying to make their collections, and their hiring practices weren't any good, and they weren't paying people the way they were supposed to be, and all these things so that they could keep this wealth. The wealthy were even using the courts to judicially murder some of the abused poor who were just or righteous people. They were just poor. These folks committed themselves to the Lord and put themselves in God's care, just as Jesus had taught them. Matthew 5, verse 39 through 42 says, "But I say unto you, that ye resist not evil. But whosoever shall smite thee on thy right cheek, turn to him the other also. And if a man will sue thee at the law and take away thy coat, let him have thy cloak also. And whosoever shall compel thee to go a mile, go with him twain. Give to him that asketh thee, and from him that would borrow of thee turn not thou away." 1 Peter 2 and verse 23 says, "Who, when he was reviled not again. When he suffered, he threatened not, but committed himself to him that judgeth righteously." So we find James is telling them, now whether he's telling the rich this, or he's telling the poor this, or he's telling both sides this, he's literally lining up one side and saying, look, God blessed you with your wealth. Now you need to do the right things with it. Don't do the wrong things just to try to keep your wealth. If you've agreed to hire, to pay people, then pay them. But don't bring judgment against the poor just merely because they're poor and because you're rich. That's not going to cut it. It's not going to cut it in God's eye, because that's not going to please Him. We look at these things, and as James was telling them, all of these things have a very important lessons. And yet, we sit up here and we have to realize that even in his day, they were important lessons. Much more it is in today's day. A prime example of that, I don't know how you look at things, but we kind of Lori and I talked about it this morning when we were out. We get a State of the Union from the president that says he's going to do everything in his power to keep everything that's happening over there from hurting our economy over here. Gas prices, food prices, everything else, it's going to come down. And the very first thing I noticed this morning was that gas prices went up. And food prices. And I sit there thinking, either somebody wasn't listening or somebody was just telling us what we want to hear. It's ironic. I mean, it shouldn't have anything to do with us, with especially our economics over here. But it does. Or they'll tell you it does. I can tell you, if man has anything to do about it, we probably ain't going to see it go down anywhere the way that they're going. But we still have to trust and things, and